And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880. Pete Belcaster and Joe Brett, the real estate guys, in the house with you today. And thanks for joining us here on July the 14th for our show. My goodness, summer is here. The fair is here. It's a big week, and we got a terrific show lined up for you today. With us, Joe, is our good friend Alice Lima from John L. Scott, who's joined us here today to talk about real estate and estate planning. We're also joined by, first time with us, is Ken Tharpe, who's an attorney here in Medford. We'll talk about estate planning. And Alice, estate planning, before we talk about it, it's an important issue, isn't it? We don't talk about it much as people and individuals and families.
And it is, especially if you have real estate assets and you have people in your life that you would like to have that passed on. And I have a hospice background, so I've seen both sides of it, and it can be very chaotic and extremely painful if arrangements aren't made ahead of time.
Yeah, and we see this all the time, right? I mean, it's there. Before we get with Ken, just the market. Let's get you update. Tell people, because she has a keen eye on the market. You know that. I mean, she does. And so here we are, mid-July. Tell me what you're seeing out there.
Well, I'm experiencing a real noticeable transition from a seller's market to a buyer's market. I think a year ago, last July, I said I think we're at the beginning of a change, and now it's a year later, and a lot of us are noticing that things are different. It's been more in the higher price points are softening. There are still competitive price points, but they're less competitive. And the buyers really seem to be acutely aware of the change, not so much the sellers. So that's where I got the idea of a transition.
I think you're right. The sellers are the ones not quite believing what Alice is saying.
Because they've had it good for a long time.
Well, just to show you how it's changed, have you seen the latest MLS stats? Alice came out, and I just wanted to share a couple of things with you for them. First of all, sales were up. I mean, sales were up about 5%, over the year. But what's interesting is new construction was down in the 3-month period this year compared to a year ago. It's literally non-existent in Josephine County. There's only a handful there. Rural property sales in both counties are down again this year compared to last year, as you know. I guess probably the only I don't say positive thing there is that the number of listings, we've talked about that for years, it seems like, they're up from a year ago. So
and that
came through, didn't it?
Having
that was true.
More inventory softens the market as well.
Yeah. But in different price categories is really where the market is at, and that depends on where you are at with your sale. If you're selling or if you're buying, that's really the critical point, right?
And I would make a huge pitch right now. If you're thinking of upsizing, this is a great time because the interest rates are still relatively low, but you got to get out from under the asset you have.
Right.
So I would try to just jump out of the house you're selling and jump into the home of your dreams.
And the inventory in the higher price market, if you're moving up like that, there's more inventory in that category.
There's more inventory, and it's definitely a buyer's market. You'll make the deal of a lifetime if your price point is higher, or if you're reconfiguring your portfolio. We're going to talk about estate and planning with Ken, and it's a great time to move things around.
Yeah, because people, you buy, you sell, you've invested, now you age, and all of a sudden you're retired. And
a lot of those sellers have a little equity. So
just a little.
They're fighting they're still fighting for that top dollar, but it's it's a more reasonable market that's emerging. Good call, Alice.
Yeah, they have more equity for sure.
Well, so Alice, it's changing. It is changing the market, I think, a little bit. Lennox Scott, who was here, we heard last week. We listened to him also. Everything's changing a little bit, but it's still a very strong market, and we don't want to say that it's not, because there's a lot of sales going on. Oh my goodness, John L. Scott sold with $93 million in sales, in real estate sales, in June.
In 1 month.
In 1 month.
Yeah.
That's how the market is still
in 1 month
putting out a tremendous amount of business, isn't it?
10 years ago, we talked about $560 million as an annual high watermark. Think what that would do over 12 months.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing out of the deal. All right. Well, we know that the market obviously is changing, and you want to stay up on it, that's for sure, and that's why we talk about that. Well, one of the topics that we want to share with you today is about estate planning and what you need to know to do it right and avoid problems, especially for your family when you're not here, right? And so Ken Tharpe has joined us today, and Ken is an attorney here in Medford. Nice to have you joining us. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
You got into the estate planning. To me, that's a fascinating part of law. Of what you do is that to me. But is it for you?
For me, it's I started out in litigation, and that's conflict and that's difficult situations for everybody. Estate planning is more of a positive thing. We're trying to plan for the future. We're trying to plan for better. We're planning for our death, but we're prospectively doing it in a positive way, which is better than civil litigation.
So what's the kind of the minimum requirements? I mean, I've never thought of it. What's the minimum that I should, if I'm one of our listeners or viewers, and what does it take? What do I have to own or something to make this work or have to have?
So from an estate planning standpoint, you're really focused on two things. What happens to my stuff when I die, and that we deal with in a will or a trust or some other things we can talk about. And then who's going to manage my finances if I'm unable to do that? And
so if I get incapacitated or something like
stroke
that,
or dementia, that kind of thing, but I'm still alive.
Right. Okay.
And that's a power of attorney.
Power of attorney.
And then the third is who's going to make residential and healthcare decisions for me in the event of my death or not death or just disability or incapacity. And that is Oregon has a form called an advance directive. It's a statutory form that you fill out to appoint a healthcare representative, and then also it has the healthcare instructions, which you've probably heard of, like if I'm at or near death, then life support would only postpone the moment of my death. I do want tube feeding, I don't.
Yeah.
So you fill that form out, and those are really the three basic documents.
Yeah. I have, as you do, Alice, clients who we talk to and have none of this. They haven't, for whatever reason. Maybe they did a will years ago and they don't even know where it is, kind of thing. So we find that all the time, don't you? I would assume.
Yeah, and it's really scary, I think, not only as a real estate person, but also just as a human. I've had dear friends with terminal cancer and young children, and they just really drag their feet about getting these documents in place. And it just creates a lot of chaos and extra hardship, I think, on the people left behind. So it's really better to get in front of it.
In front of it.
Regardless of how old you are and whether you own a lot of stuff or not.
Yeah, well, if I own stuff, I own, what makes up those?
What makes up your stuff?
Yeah,
everything you own is a part of your estate, right? So your real property, any investment holdings you have, if you have membership interest in an LLC or other stocks. Oftentimes people have stocks, but they have basically an investment account that's just a bank, similar to a bank account, and also regular bank accounts. All your personal properties, your stuff, your vehicles. So everything that you own that's yours when you die is what needs to be dealt with. There's only a few of those things that require probate in the sense of requiring somebody to be able to sign to transfer those assets. So the assets that you own when you die that are in your own name that would require a signature. So some examples of that would be real property, would be bank accounts, potentially vehicles, although there's kind of a shortcut that DMV offers for that. Those are really the big ones.
So let's talk about real estate for a bit in these kinds of transactions and these kinds of estates. You have your house, right? That's most of us have a house or property. A lot of people have investment properties. You certainly do. Others do. So all of this adds estate. And if I get in Oregon, isn't it over $1 million? Isn't that where the tax figure starts to come into play? Or tell me where that is in Oregon.
$1 million.
$1 million.
At $1 million, the death tax, as they call it,
death tax. And I'll tell you, you may think it doesn't reach $1 million level, but it did. My mother's did. So many estates that we've seen have hit that level. And what's so interesting is that the heirs are not prepared to pay the taxes. Right? The federal death tax is much, much higher. It's like $4 million.
$10.5 million.
$10.5 million. Wow. Well, I don't think we'll be getting there anytime soon in the next year. In the next year, Joe. I don't know.
Gino's had a good month. I don't know.
We could have a good month, and you never know. Yeah, but anyway. But the point is, you have a lot of real estate out there that needs to be dealt with. And the bottom line, if you don't do any of this, what happens?
Yeah.
What happens? I mean,
And what if you're married or not married? That's
married,
another.
not married. You got property. You got things like that.
Well, Oregon has laws in place that deal with your estate if you don't have a will. And so if you don't have a will, then it's going to pass according to the laws of intestacy.
And that is your family.
Well, it's your spouse.
Your spouse is first.
If you're married and you guys have the same kids.
Okay.
If you're married and you have different kids, you
Okay.
have kids from another relationship, then one half goes to your spouse and one half goes to those kids.
Okay. All right.
If you're not married and you don't have kids, it goes up to your parents and then it goes on out to your brothers and sisters.
So all the way down that line, it kind of follows that tree there, doesn't it?
And I think that's a really important point to make for single people, unmarried people, that chain of distribution, you need to be clear that is going to go to your parents and then to your siblings. And you
Right.
need to really assess those relationships for good or not good so that you know how you want your stuff distributed.
Because I would think that family disputes over estates must be, obviously, I mean, I assume you experience that a lot.
They're common and they can be quite nasty.
They can be really bitter, can't they?
Yeah.
over,
It's not like a business dispute. You have 40 or 50 years of animus that now has an outlet. So
Yeah.
it can be, it's similar in that way to kind of divorce rather
Yeah.
than general civil litigation. There's
So-
more emotion involved.
More emotional. I'm sure you've seen it all, haven't you?
Yeah.
Big estates, small estates. It doesn't really matter, does it? In terms when the family gets into this.
No, I clerked for a judge when I first got out of law school, and one of the issues they were fighting about in an estate was mom's Beanie Baby collection. We were actually in court with attorneys hearing arguments about who should get the Beanie Baby
It
collection.
comes right down
Wow.
to that. Makes that old house on the corner that I own here, or that rental property, I guess seem quiet. But so many people that we know own additional properties and things like that. So your estate adds up and things like that. And so you want to be prepared and be planned for it. So we've got a break coming up here, and we're going to continue on with our guest today. Alice Lima's here from John L. Scott. We always like visiting with Alice. Ken Tharpe, who's an attorney here in Medford as well. We're talking about estate planning. The Real Estate Show continues here on KCMX right after this. And welcome back to the Real Estate Show here on KCMX News Media 880. Pete Belcaster and Joe Brett, the real estate guys, with you today at midsummer. A good time to kind of think about the future and your estates, especially if you own real estate or not, but a good time to begin to think about what you're planning with, because, as you know, it's important, Joe.
It's Fair Week, too, and it's in the low hundreds this week. So I'm thinking about that little 3-foot pool in my backyard as well. And probably I should be thinking more about my estate planning at my 58 years along the way with the birthday on the horizon.
Yeah.
What?
Well, you haven't. In other words, he has planned nothing for. Is what he's saying. He has no plans. He's nothing there. And
I have
if he
plans
died,
to cool off this weekend, and I haven't gone much further.
And if he died tomorrow, his estate, whatever there is there, would be divided up the way you said earlier.
I might need your card before.
Not a very smart way to do it. We might add. Okay.
Well, and it happens. It happens suddenly sometimes, and then what do you do?
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. Okay.
And I'll tell you one thing we haven't really touched on, but is, to my mind, from an estate planning standpoint, maybe more important than what happens to my stuff when I die, is what happens to my stuff, or who's going to make decisions about what happens to my stuff when I'm still alive, but I can't manage my own affairs.
Okay.
Because there you're looking at, decisions about, do I stay in my home or do I go into a facility?
Right. Well, we certainly see that all the time.
Who's going to manage my finances? Who do I trust the most to handle my bills? That sort of thing. And you get that through the power of attorney document, which is part of the process. And one of the things that I've found with clients is they're so focused on, I want to make sure what happens when I die. And I remind them, hey, you're my client. I care way more about what happens while you're alive and you can't take care of yourself than when you're dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's real important to have that power of attorney. And typically when we do that, we will only nominate a single person because there's some administrative issues. So, for example, if you and I are Alice's co-powers of attorney, it's possible that a bank or whomever we're dealing with may require both of our signatures to do anything. So that can add some administrative difficulties.
Yeah.
And one of the things you see in families sometimes, if we're brothers and at some point we don't get along or we don't agree about what should happen to mom's house, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to focus on a single individual with alternates down the line.
One person that's good advice to have with that. There's so much involved with your home. I would think that what if you had multiple properties? I mean, do people generally, when they do estate planning, sell properties immediately after the death in the family, or do they keep the properties, or is there a trend there? Do you guys see it all?
If it's one, typical estate, a family home, a couple of bank accounts, a car.
Sure. Okay.
They're typically going to sell that house.
They're going to sell the house. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
If there's more houses, they can specifically devise a house to particular children. Although typically when you inherit from an estate, you take it subject to the encumbrance. So if there's a mortgage on the house, then if you inherit that, you're going to be responsible for that mortgage.
And the taxes as well. One of the things that I've had clients, Oregon has a homestead exemption. If you're 62 or older and you own your home, you can defer your property taxes out of that, until you die or you sell the house. And I've had clients who they're pretty elderly, obviously, and they had built up almost a $75,000 tax liability by deferring their they did it right when they were 62. Okay, here they're now like in their 80s, and so they have this humongous tax liability there. And I asked them, do your kids know that you've done this? Because the kids are going to get this tax liability at some point in the future, and if you don't know it's there, they're going to be really mad at you, right? I mean, that's kind of the thing that we see.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had that exact issue where the kids come in and they didn't know about it. Yeah. And it was $50,000, $60,000, $70,000.
Yeah.
And against the equity that you burn, probably that debt is ahead of the equity, which can really make the financial transaction of that property tight. What you got to pay off and what you may.
Well, you don't want to do a homestead exemption if you owe a lot of money on the house. I wouldn't think, because you're going to outstrip. I mean, you're going to your equity is going to be gone. You can't keep up with it. But people do that, and that is. And let's look. The homestead exemption is something that. Is a valid tool for people who are elderly, want to stay in their home. It works sometimes, and not for everybody, but that is an option. Yeah,
and sometimes people do refinancing and take equity out of the property and don't tell their heirs. And so, and I have a situation just this morning where the heirs are actually having to give the house back to the bank, and that was really not what the original older person's desire was. They were really hoping to leave something to the family.
Right. If you don't, if you go get money on it, the family is thinking the house is paid off or the property's paid off. I'm going to get a whole bunch of money here out of this. Come to find out, they may have done something else. Oh my goodness, that way I can see those issues just bubbling out there all the time that people like Ken has to have to face, right?
Well, and their families, because not all kids are close with their parents. So they, mom or dad dies, they come to town and they have to sort of divine what bank accounts, what debts, that sort of thing. Yeah. And like in the example I gave, I don't even think we realized there was deferred taxes until we were in escrow. And it popped up on the title report.
On the title report, yeah.
And I can tell you from experience, they don't negotiate on that one.
No, they're not going to. No, they're not going to negotiate. You're going to pay the full. You're going to pay the full price. You're going to sell the house.
Yeah.
Well, again, it comes back to that planning ahead of what you think you want to do by how much your assets are. Mm-hmm. I mean, now let me ask you this: I've heard that if you own real property in 2 states, say you own a house in Oregon, you have a vacation rental or something in California, and say in your estate and you die, that because you own property in 2 states that you automatically go to probate. Is that true?
No.
It's not.
No.
Okay.
But, one of the ways that you can deal with the disposition of your estate is through a trust.
Okay.
And a lot of people talk about trusts and are attracted to trusts because they're a method for avoiding probate.
Okay.
And maybe I have to back up just a little bit and talk a little bit about probate to tell you why trusts avoid probate. During your lifetime, if you have a power of attorney, you've authorized that person to handle your finances.
Okay.
When you die, that power of attorney terminates. So at that point in time, there's no one to handle your finances.
Okay.
And so if there's any assets that you have, like we talked about earlier, bank accounts, real property, that sort of thing, that would require your signature to transfer,
Right.
we have to somehow get somebody that authority. The only way we can get that authority is through the courts, and that's probate. So in your will, you nominate who you want as that personal representative. And to start the probate, we file that with the court and ask the court to admit the estate to probate and appoint that person as the personal representative.
Okay. All right.
The court says, okay, I'll give you the authority to administer the estate, but I'm going to require certain things of you. You have to file an inventory. You have to notify certain people.
Yeah.
You have to publish the notice in the paper and wait the 4 months for the different things that they do to make sure everybody's taken care of.
So I can avoid all that right now with the trust.
Potentially you can avoid that with a trust, and the reason that you can
Okay.
avoid that with a trust is because when you create the trust, you've created an entity separate from yourself.
I've already set up everybody who's going to sign for me, that kind of thing?
No,
Okay.
it's more like creating a corporation.
Oh, okay.
So you've created this legal fiction,
Okay.
and in the trust, you nominate who the trustee is, which is akin to a president of a corporation,
Okay.
and then who's going to take over afterwards.
Right.
As part of setting up the trust, we literally transfer the assets to the trust. So when you create the trust, we record deeds transferring the real property from
to the
Ken
individual
Tharpe.
to the trust. Now I see, as you guys do, also Joe and Alice do, on so many MLS forms. The forms that we see. So many properties are owned by trusts, right?
Yeah.
The living trusts or whatever. They're all those kinds of things. They're everywhere, right? So people seem to be doing this.
That is correct. And in part because it avoids probate.
It avoids it. And probate's expensive. My father had to go through that.
Anything, in the courts.
Yeah, my
Can be
father
that
went
way.
through that. He did not. But my mother had a trust and avoided that. So that was absolutely true, what you say there.
Probate it can be expensive. I don't necessarily discourage I don't necessarily encourage planning solely to avoid probate.
Okay, all right.
And part of the reason for that is what I was saying about having to basically, they call it funding, transferring the assets into the trust. And so when we're sitting together and we're doing all that, that's all done. But then you're going to go on your way and you're not going to think about me for 10 or 15 years. And in that time, you might sell that house and buy another house, or
Sure, yeah.
you might
Oh, yeah,
refinance
yeah.
that house or change banks,
Yeah.
and then you die.
Yeah.
And then your kid comes in and says, hey, Dad had a trust and I'm the trustee. Well, what assets does he have? Well, he owns this real property and he owns this bank account. Well, how are they titled? Well, they're in his name. They're not in the trust because you forgot to title them that way.
They're not in the trust
It
name.
didn't get
Oh, yes.
transferred.
That's the key, isn't it? If you don't transfer it,
And you don't
and it's still in
keep
your
transferring.
name, so you got to create the trust. So you really recommend, if I'm hearing you right, that really estate planning should have a trust.
I will tell you, you're trying to, in certain circumstances, I'll tell you one place where I do always go with the
Okay.
trust, and that is when people own real property in more than one state.
Own real property in more than one state.
That is correct.
They should go to a trust.
Correct.
Immediately. Okay, I have that. Okay.
And the
All
reason
right.
for that is because each state has jurisdiction over its real property. So you end up having to probate in more than one state if you own property in different
Okay.
states in your
All
individual
right.
name.
Someone like Alice who has lots of properties. Her estate, as she goes and in her business and everything, should she have a trust in her estate or just a will?
It depends on her sophistication. The difficulty is we do a trust to avoid the probate, but you have to keep it up to avoid the probate. In the scenario I just said, if you died and now you own a house out of the trust, we have to probate that in. So we've paid the extra for the trust, and we're still having to pay for the probate.
That would not be smart. I don't want you to do that. Don't do it that way, whatever that was there, Alice.
I mean, a trust does have the ability to avoid a probate, but I would say half the trusts that I administer require a probate.
Yeah. So what about partnerships? What about people who have multiple business transactions, if you will? They're part owners in many properties, or they're also co-signers with their adult children. What do you do with all those pieces of pie?
Cry mostly. I would.
Joint owner,
Co-sign is probably the
joint ownership.
the key advice there.
Don't co-sign for your kids.
Yeah,
Well, Believe me, that is my mantra for 10 years on this show. Never, seriously, don't co-sign for your children because you're going to get stuck with it, especially in real property. And I've been there, so believe me. Anyway.
Well, and I can even go a step further than that, because what we see a lot is people adding a child as a joint owner on a bank account,
right,
or as a joint owner on real property.
They can go borrow on that property.
Not only that, but their creditors can attach that.
Right. Yes, against you. Yes.
So, yeah, that's an issue that we run into quite a bit.
So you see that a lot, don't you? I hear that. I you know that actually happens more than what I think we would think.
And the other
Too
thing to keep in mind there, if you have 3 kids and you want everything to go in equal shares to your 3 kids, but you have one of your children as a joint owner on your bank accounts, when you die, those bank accounts pass to that kid that's a joint owner. They're not part of your estate. The will doesn't matter for that.
It doesn't matter.
It's separate.
So we've seen that inconsistency.
Yeah.
Have you seen where parents like one kid more than the other? Or no.
I'm sure.
I'm trying to get some estate stories.
My parents like me better than my brother.
You should be sitting pretty in the trust then.
And I'll bet you that you've seen. I'll bet you've seen some of those where parents do that in estates. They favor one or another. A child was closer to me, helped me more than the others. Or I've heard that stories all the time. So it does actually. Hey, the best thing about my thing is that I no longer have that debt of co-signing with my child. Remember, after how many years did we do that? That's a good thing. We got a break coming up here. One more segment to go. We're with Ken Tharpe, attorney here in Medford, talking about estate planning, along with Alice Lindbergh from John L. Scott. It's our Market Watch show. Pete and Joe, we're coming right back after this. And welcome back to the Real Estate Show here on KCMX News Media 880. Pete and Joe, the real estate guys, with you. Don't forget, you can check out any of our past shows at realestateshowOregon.com, which is our website. Some terrific past shows. CEO Lennox Scott from John L. Scott is on there. Glenn Cunningham, our CPA, about taxes in the real estate world regarding the new tax laws, and some terrific shows ahead as well. We get into summer. I talk with Alice all the time about wells and just all sorts of things that happen. Now it's a busy time of the year. Don't you think?
It is. There's a lot of people trying to get their transactions done before the weather changes, before school starts, and sometimes it goes swimmingly, and sometimes we need to stop and fix a well or fix a septic or straighten out a probate.
The will's not there. I'll tell you one thing though that it seems to me in terms of buying and selling right now is that. Buyers, if they're going to pay the prices that the sellers are asking, which is there, these places have to pretty much be move-in ready, don't they? Or they're going to demand that there's be repairs or something done in these properties to pay the prices that they are. Are you experiencing that?
Yeah, I think in a changing market, part of the transition is there's more houses available. The buyers get more picky. I don't want to compare it to 2009 because that was a crash. Right. I think what we're going through is a normal, natural adjustment that we have every 9 to 11 years. It's not going to go straight up forever. That would be weird. And as the market, even in a seller's market, you still want to pass your house on in good shape. I just think that should be a point of pride, and then you don't have problems and legalities later. So take the time to get your house inspected, do the repairs, and pass on a good product, a good house.
Well, that's really good.
And the buyers are more picky now, and that's just what it looks like to be in a buyer's market.
Yeah, well, median prices, they rose 7.8% in Jackson County from over a year ago. Below double digits, I know, but it's still that's pretty healthy. As you see, I always look. Whenever you go through these stats and you look at them, you start analyzing. You can really dig down into them, and you really see a lot of changes coming.
You can see it every month.
The worst part of it, and something that we have talked about so much, if I can find it here, is the affordability index that is put out on a monthly basis, and we've seen it well above 100 in Jackson County from 2009 on. It changed over about a year ago.
Right.
Remember? About a year ago, that line over less than 100, which is less affordability now, continues to go. And let me just hear it. Can you see this? I don't know if you can show this or not, but you can see how it's come down. And what's happening is that every percent it comes down, fewer people are able to get on the market. It's just like interest rates. When they go up 1%, you lose 10% of the buyers. So. You can see the affordability index, which is an issue here in all of our counties. It's not going away. And you're seeing it become more acute as prices continue to change. And until the market changes, Alice, we're going to see that happen. And that forces people out of the market.
Yeah.
And when you have the prices going up and the interest rates going up at the same time, it's doubly hard. In our valley, as much as I love it, we don't have a great amount of manufacturing. We don't have a huge business environment here. It's not like a big city. And I think our wages, sometimes get out of kilter with what the real estate market is doing. They're kind of disconnected.
Yeah. Well, the economy right now is really good. And as you see, that's why people are buying. That's why they're moving here, for all those kinds of reasons. Well, Ken Tharpe is here, an attorney. We're kind of crazy talking about all this stuff, aren't we? This kind of consumes you as much as I'm sure your business does too.
Sure.
So, and finally, in estate planning, you really do recommend, though, that check your will. Say if you've done it years ago, you should check it again, bring it into you. Or what should someone do with that?
We recommend every 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
So someone comes in and does an estate plan. We try to send a letter at 5 years that says, you should come in and check.
Right. So my will that I found, by the way, Joe, I found this thing, was done in 1982. I moved. I found it. I did it in 1982, and I'm reading this thing and I go, my God, there's nothing here even remotely. Nothing.
A little different world then, wasn't it?
1982. No kidding. But that's what people have, right? So they should do that. Once you do
An estate checkup. I did mine.
Estate checkup. Yes.
I did mine around life events. I had young children when I was divorced, and a lot of assets, and that looks way different than it does now, where they're of age. One of them owns a house already, and in my in between time, I had a very trusted business partner to take care of. They were the executive of my estate. They were involved in all of my transactions, but now it's my adult kids. But I'm going to have to go back to Ken because I put them on equally, and even though they love and get along together, we're going to have to sort out who's going to do what.
You got to have them.
We're sending them to you, Ken.
Yeah, that's.
And one of them owns a house, and I bet you a donut he doesn't have a will.
Yeah.
And you know who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
And you've been listening to the real estate show today and learned exactly why you need to get out in front of
I'm
that.
going to send him the link.
I love the idea. Estate, what did you say? Estate.
What did I say? Checkup? I don't know.
Estate checkup.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, seriously, people just like me.
Yeah.
What I wrote, what I have, would not solve anything.
Now, understand that doesn't mean it's not legally effective. It's just, maybe the people you nominated as personal representatives are dead.
Yeah.
Different things have changed.
Yeah. My child has grown up. I mean, those kinds of things. So you want to be able to do that.
So
it's really fascinating.
I feel less guilty. I did not do mine in 1982 and in front of it like you were there. I was still in high school. I was not far out of college in 1982.
Do you have a will right now?
I don't.
See, that's what I'm saying. And you own real property and your age, you should do that.
I can't afford to die, or
So what
nor
about-
can my
what
family afford for me to die. So that's my insurance policy.
Do you want medical directives like revisited every 5 years? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, what do you think's the most important thing? Your well-being,
your
or
life,
your finances. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that those are up to date. At least who the healthcare representative is going to be.
Yeah. And people with lots of cash accounts, they have stocks, that kind of thing. Those also, you want to have everything into these will or estates, right? I mean, everything you want to have in there, and mostly have your person representative for you, right?
There's a lot to talk about.
Okay, you only got about a minute or so. You got to hurry. Okay.
Right. Bank accounts. There's other ways that you can do it. Joint ownership or beneficiary designation.
Okay.
Real property. We didn't really get into this, but joint ownership with survivorship. And Oregon, in the last 3 or 4 years, created what's called a transfer on death deed, which is a deed that you can execute during your lifetime and record that becomes effective on your death and transfers the property.
Wow. Bottom line is that you need to go see someone like you if you have a will that you haven't updated, or talk about a trust for your family to get this. We need to go see someone. You do it. Have a professional do it. And this is my thing here.
Right.
We should come and see you, right?
Yeah, come and see somebody that does estate planning and that can look at everything that you have and everything you want globally and talk about a mix of will, joint ownership, beneficiary designation, trust, different things that are all available to us to do our estate planning.
And you have an option as the person, the person doing this, right? You have a lot of options, really, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Just don't do nothing, because that's the worst thing. that you can do. I'm looking at you as I say that, but I'm going to make you.
And
you
I want to
do
leave
it.
a little to my pets. I've had really good dogs.
Well, and do your medical directive. That is super, super
That
important.
is, I don't mean to make fun of it. It's
Yeah.
really, my eyes are opening as the conversation has gone on.
Well,
today.
medical directive, but also estate checkup.
An estate checkup.
I think that is a great idea, and that so many of our viewers and listeners we need to do if
And
you
don't
haven't
leave your
done
loved
this.
ones in the lurch
Yeah.
or in a mess.
Share
that
with
you
it.
could have been
Don't
out
be
in front
quiet.
of and taken care of.
And talk about it. It's
Yeah.
something you got to talk about. And I
It's
find
gonna happen.
And I find that so many people never talk about it. And when
We
they
don't like
do
to
talk
think
about
about
it, they open up. They open up, and they are just flowing out because they have never talked about it and they want to. So
They're thinking about it.
yeah. So that's going to do it for us.
Great
Hey,
show. Thank
we're
you,
out of
Ken.
time. Ken,
Oh,
thank
my
you.
pleasure. Thank you guys for
coming
having
by.
me.
We'll do it again.
Yeah,
Alice.
let's have him again.
Yeah.
Well, always nice to visit with you. And go do your will, okay?
I'm
Go
gonna-
back and
Call
get the
Ken.
will coin. That'll do it for the Real Estate Show here today. Thanks for joining us. For Pete and Joe, have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you next Saturday right back here on KCMX. See you next week. Good night. God bless you all.